We don't bring in beginners to this. This would crush beginners, to be honest with you, because some people are getting up to, like, in person, 6 rejections to your face, you know.
By 8 editors.
By 8 editors. It can be crushing. We go over the applications to the workshop really closely to make sure we believe that people can stand up to that part of it. It's a great learning experience, but it can also be brutal. It can be really great too. I mean, you could sell all 6 of your stories if you turned in 6. But the people we invite are also at a certain professional level, so we're all professionals in the room. And we all are at different levels and everything else. So none of the writing is at beginner level. All of it is at pro level. If you miss, you miss. But it's maybe because we're doing a lot of subgenres that are really hard.
Yes.
Anthea's, for example, this time was really hard. It's fantasy Regency. That is super hard. And, you may have the fantasy part down, but you may not have the Regency part down. So you may have sold 50 stories, but you may not be able to do that one. Or conversely, you didn't know that you could write one of those. So if you try. So it's a lot of fun, but it's learning for me, and I'm doing this for 20 years. So it's still a lot of learning.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter-century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 374 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have a special roundtable editor discussion from the WMG Publishing Workshops right here in Vegas, Nevada. And this is an episode that features the following writers/editors: Kristine Kathryn Rusch, Dean Wesley Smith, Loren Coleman, Anthea Sharp, Chris York, Ron Collins, Brigid Collins, and me, Mark Leslie. And this anthology workshop is 8 editors buying stories with professional rates, pro rates for short fiction, for 6 anthologies and 1 magazine. Now, the way these anthologies work is after the authors have been signed up and vetted for the anthology, and Chris talks a little bit about that in the forthcoming roundtable discussion, each editor has a theme. Now, the anthology I've been working on, my theme was haunted taverns, and I was looking specifically for short stories about haunted bars, pubs, taverns, etc. I needed a ghost. I needed to have some sort of bar setting. Those are my requirements. There's a whole bunch of other themes for this anthology, but each editor has their own theme for the anthology, and the writers submit their stories. Now, in this particular workshop, there were in-person attendees, and then there were also folks who were doing it remotely. But the focus right here is on the in-person, because this is where the value happens. So week by week, in the months leading up to the workshop, the assignment comes out of what the editor's looking for, and then they have a week to write a story, 7 days to write a story to that prompt, to that anthology, and they submit it. The stories get collected, they basically get read by all of the editors, and then when we get to the in-person workshop, the editors sit on a panel in the front of the room, the writers are in the room there, and each editor, in turn, will spend probably 5 minutes talking about whether or not they would buy the story, what they liked about the story, what they didn't like about the story, and any other feedback for the writer. And you go down the line, one by one by one. So as a writer, you get to hear how different editors may react to the same story. And then the final editor at the very end, and that person always goes at last, is the editor who is actually purchasing for pro rates, a professional sale, the story. And if they say they would buy it, then that author has a professional sale, and that story is going to get published in their anthology. Now, the point of this workshop, one of the many points, is not only the great feedback that you can get, because when you submit a story to a magazine or an anthology, you often get a form rejection. Sometimes, if you're lucky, and it's usually a sign that the editor likes something about your writing, they'll leave a comment or two about the story. That comment is gold, it's precious, and it's very rare. In this particular case, you get to hear from 8 different editors and their opinions on the story. And one of the things that's so important for writers to learn, because we're so hard on ourselves, is you may not realize that the reason your story got rejected wasn't because the story wasn't good, but it's because the editor already had another story, with a unicorn that falls in love with a dragon, or whatever the case may be. That they already purchased a story, or had already decided to purchase a story with those elements in it, and they didn't want to have 2 in the same anthology, because when you're building an anthology, you have to structure it in such a way that there's a variety of things that you want to hit. And so not only does the writer get to see this editor loved it, this editor hated it, this editor wasn't really sure, couldn't finish it, this editor didn't like that, but this other editor did like that. And you get to see that it's usually not you, it's usually other circumstances. And in particular, in a case like this, where we're looking at stories from really amazing writers, it's not that the story is not good, it's that it didn't hit where they wanted it to hit, or they already had something like that. Because after you go through the process, what I usually do as an editor is I have this is a solid buy right off the bat. I know I'm going to buy it. Here's some stories that I'm going to put on my maybe list because I'm not sure. I want to see what else I get. And then I'm going to sort it out. And we have a whiteboard where we track the word count that we're buying for. In this case, it was 65,000, 70,000 words. And we have a word count of, okay, here are my buys. Here are I've got some stories from some pros, for example, that have agreed to write for me. And here's the room that I have left in my budget. And this story I would have bought, for example, but I only had room for 3,000 words, and it was a 7,000 word story. So I opted to go for the 3,000 word story because I had room. And it could be something as simple as that. And the writers get to watch how the editor makes that final decision with the whiteboard, where you have a whole bunch of maybes, and then you're like, okay, so I have these 6 stories that are on my maybe list, but this one ticks this box, and this one does this, or this one offers that. And it's a really amazing experience. So that's one of the other benefits of the workshop. It is an extremely emotional time because, writers in the traditional realm are used to rejection. That's part of the process, but never usually to their face, never in person. So there's a really beautiful intimacy between the writer and the editor. And it can be hard and it can be very difficult, but it can also be really rewarding. And for me, having attended this as a writer and having attended this for many years as an editor, the reward is being able to provide feedback to brilliant writers and let them know, I'm not buying this story, but here's what I loved about it. And I think you're going to be able to sell this. And in some cases this week, there were some stories where I did not buy the story from the writer, but I saw something so wonderful in their writing that I want to help them sell it to another market that, keep going with this. And even in some cases, I've offered to sit down and help them with that, take my advice or leave it. It's just another opinion. And I think that's another element, is that the writer always has the choice to take the suggestions or not of the people who are doing this. So in any case, when we finished last night, and last night would have been August 7th, when we finished the session for the day, the editors and I sat down. It wasn't a round table, it was a rectangle table, but we were all sitting around a table, and I pulled up my phone, really high-end audio equipment, and just recorded off the cuff about 25-minute conversation of us just talking about the experience. And I wanted that for you, the writer, regardless of how you're publishing, if you're doing it yourself, if you're in traditional publishing, this can give you a little bit of an insight, at least, into that traditional publishing side of things, particularly if you've never submitted. And there are some writers here who have a very successful indie author career, but also want, just the experience, because they want to round out their experience of I'm going to write short fiction and submit to some anthologies or some magazines just to get that experience for themselves and the satisfaction of learning new skills and stuff like that. Because you can do it all. You don't have to only pick one kind of publishing. And I thought it would be fantastic for you, dear listener, to have access to the insights from these amazing editors that I am so privileged that I get to work with. So I'm going to forego the personal update this week. I'm going to forego comments from recent episodes. I'll get back to that when I'm back home again and I'm no longer on the road, which will be soon. I will be home for a few days at least so I can work on that next episode and one of the many great interviews that I have. So my apologies that the audio is not going to be as good. I did not pack my wonderful mic. I could have. I had a portable one. I should have thought of it. I should have packed it, and then I could have plugged it in my laptop, and at least we could have had a better sound. But it's not so bad. But the key thing is the content is, I think, something you're going to value. So after this word from this episode's sponsor, Cruising Writers, we're going to cut right into the round table with Kristine, Loren, Anthea, Chris, Ron, and Brigid.
Ready to elevate your writing career? Join the Cruising Writers Group sailing the Caribbean from Galveston on February 22nd to March 1st, 2025. This time, we're focused on indie authors, with special guests Mark Leslie and Aaron Wright leading a deep dive into the world of self-publishing. You'll come away with invaluable insights, but also great memories as you connect with other writers and explore charming ports of call in Roatan, Honduras, Costa Maya, Mexico, and Cozumel. Visit cruisingwriters.com to book your spot today.
So, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre from the Stark Reflections podcast. I'm here with this esteemed panel of amazing editors with WMG Workshop for the Anthology Workshop. And we've returned after, 4 years?
4.5.
4.5 years. So what I really want to do is first have everyone introduce themselves. I'll start with you, Chris.
I'm a mystery writer, primarily, dabbled in everything else, and I've been writing for 26 years. This is my first time as an editor here.
Cool, and Chris York, of course, is your name as well.
Christina York,
Christina.
Christy Fifield, Christy Evans.
All the names.
Go on.
Dean Wesley Smith, and I've been doing this for 50 years.
Wow. So you just started then, is what you're
Just got
saying?
going.
Yeah, just getting going. Awesome.
I am Ron Collins. I have been doing this for 30 years come November.
All right.
We'll see my 30th year of first publication. I write science fiction and fantasy. This is my third time in the editor's seat for the Anthology Workshop. So I'm very excited about that.
Awesome.
I'm Kathryn Rusch. I have been active in publishing since I was 16 years old, and I don't think there's a
20 years ago, right?
5 years. I don't think there's a job I haven't done in publishing, except being an agent. I think I've done everything else, and so.
There's still time.
No, not doing that one.
Okay.
I am Brigid Collins. I write mostly fantasy. This is also my third time as editor at this workshop, so that is also very exciting.
Awesome.
Anthea Sharp. I write fantasy and some speculative fiction, lots of short fiction. As Anthea Lawson, I write Victorian and Regency romance, and also written some short fiction that way. I've edited my own anthologies, paid anthologies for other authors, but this is my first time at the WMG Anthology table on this side of the table, and it's sure been a lot of fun.
And you're knocking it out of the park.
No.
I think you are.
Loren Coleman. I've been in the writing field for about 30 years now. That makes me feel very old.
Wow. And you look so young.
Yeah, I used to be the kid around here. And
You're old man.
yeah, now I am. I'm dragging myself in. I have done a lot of anthologies, actually, a lot of anthology workshops, and I've edited a good number of anthologies now at both these workshops and for other outside publishing. And so I've probably done 5 or 6 or 7. No, with Baltic, even more, 10 or 12 or more. Wow. where does it go? And I love anthologies, so I'm always happy to be here for this.
Awesome. Thank you guys for doing that in order. Now, this is just going to be an open discussion. Now, prior to this, I've already explained what this workshop is, how it's structured, how we're all doing these different anthologies, etc. So writers are listening to this, and writers who maybe have never submitted to an anthology, never submitted to a magazine or a market, what's the advice you love to make sure writers know about submitting? And it could be why, for example, why you guys are doing this workshop and why you have done so many of these workshops. And feel free to, anyone can just kind of jump in at any time. It's a free-for-all now.
Well, I think the value for these workshops is, for me as a writer and then as an editor, I write stories and I get to see stories I never would have done without the prompt of the anthology or the market you're talking about. Okay. So to me, these stories are just complete candy for me, because I never would have written some of these, and I would never have read some of the ones I've got to read, because they get to be kind of out there on the edge, which is really a blast.
Yeah, and if I can add on to that, the cool thing about the anthology workshop is that you actually get to see why it is so valuable to take those anthology prompts and guidelines and do your very best to stand them on their ear and do something that is different with the core idea. Because here in the workshop, you'll see all the manuscripts come in, and you can see the people who just go straight to the middle and how difficult and muddy it is to stand out of the pile, right, on that. But when you swing for the fences and you attempt to do something that is really interesting and unique, that you think you're just having fun with, then you stand out, and that's why a story will rise to the top here. It's a really interesting experience.
It's a lot of fun. We've been doing it for, I don't know how many years now.
We started with the Denise Little workshop clear back in the mid-90s.
Yeah, so it's been a long time.
Wow.
But we don't bring in beginners to this. This would crush beginners, to be honest with you, because some people are getting up to, like, in person, 6 rejections to your face,
By 8 editors.
By 8 editors. It can be crushing. So we go over the applications to the workshop really closely to make sure we believe that people can stand up to that part of it. It's a great learning experience, but it can also be brutal. It can be really great too. I mean, you could sell all 6 of your stories if you turned in 6. But the people we invite are also at a certain professional level, so we're all professionals in the room. And we all are at different levels and everything else. So none of the writing is at beginner level. All of it is at pro level. If you miss, you miss. But it's maybe because we're doing a lot of subgenres that are really hard. Yes. Anthea's, for example, this time was really hard. It's fantasy regency. That is super hard. And, you may have the fantasy part down, but you may not have the regency part down. So you may have sold 50 stories, but you may not be able to do that one. Or conversely, you didn't know that you could write one of those. So if you try. So it's a lot of fun, but it's learning for me, and I'm doing this for 20 years, so it's still a lot of learning.
The other thing for writers who are particularly early in their career, even when they're at a pro level, is seeing how we put these together, so that they can see they missed this, but they didn't miss it because they wrote a bad story. They missed it because their story didn't quite fit, or it was too long, or it was too short, or it didn't fit the flavor of the anthology that developed as the editor put it together.
Too much like another story.
Yeah.
Too much like
more
another
just
story.
like it, or
So many ways that they can miss that have nothing to do with you wrote a bad story.
I think that's an essential thing to take away, is that when you come to these workshops, you start to understand that editors have tastes. An editor is not a monolithic thing, and that there are some people who love what you write and some people who are like, doesn't quite work for me. I think there has only been one story this whole entire workshop that every single editor said, I would have bought this. One story, and I've been tracking it, and some of them are completely split across the board, where people are like, this was okay, it didn't really work, and other people are like, yes, I loved it, I would buy it. And then, of course, the key person is, who is the editor in the hot seat that's buying for the anthology? And that's ideally the person that you want to have sell your story too. But I love that, and I love that writers get to really see that spectrum of taste and opinion. And
I love the aspect. I think I was doing mine earlier today, and I think almost everyone was ho-hum, lukewarm, yeah, whatever, and then I bought it, and you see the author's face was just sinking, going, oh, this is a sinking ship, this thing's like, ha ha, I'm going to buy it.
And then you see all the editors turn and look at you like you've lost a marble.
Yeah, and that's even better.
Yes.
I had much the same experience in buying cozy mysteries, because most of the editors here are not deeply experienced with cozies.
Yeah.
And often they would look at a story and say, this just missed somehow. And I'd be like, oh no, this is perfect. I'm buying it.
Yeah. Right.
You edit with your dad, Brigid. What's that like?
Yeah, doing co-editing is definitely adds another layer to the mix of complexity, because you have to hit not just one editor but two, and that is
Is that harder or easier then for the writer?
is probably a bit harder.
And it's probably a bit harder.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you super hit one, then
You'll fight for it.
You can convince them, right?
Arguments
Arguments
between us.
occur, and then it's very entertaining for everybody else, except for the person who's being argued over. That's not nearly as pleasant.
So you guys, so Ron and Brigid, you guys actually meet on a weekly basis anyways, because you've co-written together and have been on the podcast together. But for this anthology as well, you've met and discussed each story, so you kind of do that. And I know Chris and Loren did the same thing. We had phone calls, etc. How mad do you get at one another when the other person doesn't see?
Well, it depends on how incorrect the other one.
Yes, and seeing that I'm always the one that's incorrect. That's not quite true. I'm being flippant. Sometimes we have different opinions, and we have to work those out. And sometimes the world solves those problems for us because, like for all the reasons we just talked about, why a story might be rejected, that is perfectly fine, right?
Yes.
We might disagree on something, and we say, well, we've got two others that are in these niches, and so since we don't agree on this one, we'll move it aside, and then we don't even really have the argument because we can put together the whole anthology the way that it is.
Right.
But when we do have disagreements, that's kind of fun.
Well, kind of. There can also be the experience of, as an individual, you read a story and you love it, and you say, if he doesn't like this story, murder will occur. And so you come to the table ready to have the fisticuffs, and then perhaps they come back and say, yeah, I love that story too. And you're like, oh, okay, well, what do I do with all this pent-up angry energy I'm prepared to expel?
And these weapons I've got.
Loren and I each had a story in the anthology, one where I said, Loren, you got to finish this one. You got to read it. And he said to me, yeah, you got to get past that first page of that other story.
Yeah.
And, the one that he made me reread, I think is probably the best one that we're going to have in the anthology. And the one that I made him reread turned out to be...
Just caught me at the wrong moment and just cued me wrong. So I just got shuffled out of it. But then I reread it, I'm like, yeah, this should definitely be in there.
Yeah.
So let's dig into that, because when an editor's reading for an anthology, the author doesn't get that second chance. It's like, I just spilled coffee on my lap and I picked up your story and I'm still in a bad mood and I stopped reading it and I missed it. But with a co-author or a co-editor, you guys
Safety
help
net.
it almost can be a safety net, because the story that, again, you talked, that could have been the best story.
It can be a safety net, but it's also the converse. I mean, so one of us really loves it and the other one really hates it. Then you have to make the decision. Is it going to be, how much room do we have? We figured each one of us got one freebie.
Okay.
He gets one he loves, I get one I love. We didn't end up using that.
No.
But that's how we set it up.
Really? You didn't have that one
didn't.
sort of-
We either convinced each other that it was right for the anthology or that it wasn't.
Yeah.
We both were passionate about a couple stories, but we were both passionate about the same stories
We were.
for the most
like,
part.
I really love this one.
And then the two stories we were passionate about that we didn't agree on, once the person read it, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Like just
I missed it. I'm sorry, I missed it.
Me too.
I'm glad you found me. Yeah, it turned out
So,
to be really
no,
great.
I was looking forward to a knockdown drag out because I was going to lose, but I was looking forward to the fight.
Yeah, you were going to lose. But it's,
So let's talk about, and Anthea, you did this as well, and Ron and Brigid, you've got that on the board right now because we're in the midst of your anthology, is those elements of this is a silly story, and this has Faye, and this has the elements. Can you talk about how those different pieces can be great for story?
When I was reading, and as Chris said, I had a pretty challenging subgenre that the call was for, which I love. And as I said earlier, as Anthea Sharp, I write fantasy. As Anthea Lawson, I write Regency romance, and this was fantasy Regency. So I love that because it was a blend.
And Sharp is the editor on this one, right? Not Lawson?
Correct, because Anthea Lawson doesn't have magical or paranormal elements in her fiction, except for occasionally a ghost. But this we have all kinds of really interesting, wacky, fantastical things going on with this anthology, which is great. But as I was editing, I was thinking, well, okay, we need to hit these certain Regency elements. We also need to hit these certain fantasy elements. And also, Regency is pretty romance congruent as well. So then we had a whole romantic thread to kind of deal with as well. So there were multiple balls in the air, and then I started making notes and ended up making a rubric for myself. I didn't start with this rubric, but it kind of had to come into being partway through editing because I realized, well, I need all these different Regency locations. They can't all be in London ballrooms. And the low-hanging fruit is a term you'll hear through these anthologies. And what low-hanging fruit is the easy and obvious story answer. And so if you're writing a fantasy Regency and you set it at a ball and there's magicians doing magic, there's a lot of stories that come in that are magicians at a ball, because that's the obvious thing. And like Ron said, don't swing for the fences, be really try and go unique.
And I thought that was interesting. We kind of riffed off of you for our rubric up there, but the Regency has some very solid check marks, and then some that are out on the edges, right? For ours, which was Halloween and romance, right, there are some very clear romance elements that we want to put in. The Halloween is more open-ended genre bending and so forth, and so fundamentally we just kind of listed a collection of things that we wanted to have. And then now we're in the middle of building it, and actually I think it was Brigid who was putting together all of the mindsets on each of the genre pieces and the types of romance.
I was tagging each story with little pieces, elements of what's in this story, not just genre, but what type of tone and what type of character and what type of romance story and what type of Halloween element is in there. So we could see kind of what collection of leaves had blown in on the wind, and then look upon those and see what leaves go together and what leaves don't.
Yeah, and I think that's actually circling back around into, what advice would you give to a writer to be writing for anthologies? One of the reasons why swinging for the fences and doing something totally different works in that sense, and you can see it when you're here in the workshop. On the board, you can see, here's all the different niches within each one of the different things you're looking for. We've got different kinds of Halloween stories and different kinds of romances. And so if I happen to hit exactly the same kind of Halloween and romance, then I'm battling with another story.
Right.
Whereas if I do something highly unique and original in this area, then I stand out.
It's like the vote splitting that happens on those ones, right?
Yeah.
I think we saw this in almost every ones where we'd say, I have a story like this, and yours is also like this, and I could only have one. Mm-hmm. And then it came down to a coin toss, a matter of personal taste. This one was shorter and I needed short, or this one was longer and I needed long.
And Chris York's is interesting in that sense because you wanted everything to be beach-centric, right?
Yes.
So how many different ways can you twist beach? It turns out a lot of ways.
Well, one of them's at 30,000 feet, actually.
Yeah.
I was amazed at how many different things I had, but I had one that came off of my maybe list, because it was a unique setting that I didn't already have.
Yeah, we're doing one more thing here with what I'm doing, and that's I'm editing for Pulp House, which isn't an anthology. But I'm looking at every story that's here in the workshop with the attitude of it has to be Pulp House. Pulp House is my taste.
Yeah.
If you look at it, it's just, it's been that way since 1991 when we started Pulp House Fiction Magazine. And it's just me. But I'm looking at this, they have to be different, they have to be outlandish, they have to be off-center, and like that. And then the editors have to not buy it. And so that's a lesson to the early writers out there is sometimes, I've bought 5 stories so far this workshop for Pulp House. Those 5 stories means the editors didn't buy them.
Right.
And yet they're high quality, which is Pulp House, really high quality writing, really whacked out, different. And so to writers out there, the young writers out there saying, well, so-and-so rejected it, so I have to retire it. No, just get it to the next editor.
Right.
Because, these guys are rejecting stories here that I am buying for one of the most prestigious magazines in the country,
right?
And that has some of the highest quality, and so that's fascinating. These anthologies are going to be extremely high quality, but on top of that, I'm getting stories off the top from Pulp House,
right.
And I wanted to buy a lot of stories.
But we wouldn't let you.
Yeah. The editor said, no, we're keeping that one.
There's always a special delight when Dean says first that he wants to buy it for Pulp House, and you can be like,
Yeah.
no, you are.
No, you're not getting it.
But I love that aspect of, with this particular anthology workshop, is that you get 2 bites at the apple as a writer. And also, if you swing really hard for the fences and write a kick-ass story, you have a really good chance, if you miss the anthology, that Dean could pick it up. Another thing I've seen, because I've been on the writer side of the table for anthology, it's not happening as much in this workshop because there's really super specific subgenres that we're writing for. But in past anthologies, editors would steal stories from other anthologies.
Not a lot this time.
No,
Not this time,
We're
yeah.
different subgenres. We're so, we have
So
a
distinct.
cozy and fantasy regency and science fiction mystery and Halloween hearts and, military science
There was
fiction.
one sci-fi mystery story we could have stolen for sci-fi military, but that was it. But you won't give it up. So.
I will not. I'm also editing the science fiction mystery. I'm not giving it up.
So the other aspect is, and it's just a quick thing, is some editors read a story and it's like it has to be the story it is, and I'm taking it, and other editors will do developmental stuff with it. So that's a different thing writers sometimes hit, is like, oh, there's something there, but I see what can be done with it. How do you guys, by default, how do you approach? Is it I want the story as is, or I see something and I want to work with
Let's
it?
just go ahead.
Yeah, let's do that. So Chris.
Most of mine I took as is. I was able to fill my anthology without that, with one exception for a very minor edit.
Right.
As an editor, that's a lot of work to work on a developmental level.
Yeah.
And if you can do your job without having to spend that time,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, you're lucky. I am hard fast. If the story doesn't work as is, I reject it.
Yeah.
Because I get enough stories, even though I'm not in an open market at all. I get enough stories from top professionals around the world that I don't need to think. And if a top professional sends me a story, it either works for me or it doesn't. And so I don't do any developmental editing at all.
Chris?
I do, because I fall in love with stories. And so, the story may be 98% there, but I want it the extra 2%. So I will get it the extra 2%. But if I fall in love with it and it's only 50% there, I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to do not a lot of hands-on, but if it's really wonderful, and I think it can be even more. I try to make good stories great. I'm not going to buy it if it's not good, but I really want my anthology to be full of great stories. So.
Yeah, and I will say that having been on the editor side and on the writer side, being on the writer side, watching Chris do that can be awe-inspiring.
Yes.
Yes, it can be.
You know, when you have an award-winning editor being able to dig into the story and see what you were trying to do and say, I think this is what you're trying to do, why don't you do this? It's an amazing thing. Me personally, I'm on Chris's side of the fence. I am willing to spend the time if I love the story so much and if the author is willing to do the work.
Right.
I think that's an important thing. The author always, when I have asked for, and when Brigid and I have asked for things, and Brigid will have her own view on this, I'm sure, is try to be very conscious of, this is what I think needs to be done. Is this what you think needs to be done? Does that fit your vision? And if you are willing to do that, then I want to spend the time.
Right.
I always say that too. It's the author's story, not mine. I'm a writer myself, so I can write it myself, but I would rather have them do it.
Yeah. Brigid?
Yeah, definitely with the author's consent all the way. Yeah, if I love a story and I think that it needs a fix, and if I can already see how to do that fix, then I am perfectly willing to do the work with the author. If I have to sit down and think about how to fix it, then that extra thinking is already extra work. So I'm not likely to want to do that work. But if I can say, oh, all you have to do is just fix your opening a little bit, or move this paragraph here, or put a final line here, then yeah, I'm there.
Yeah, what Brigid said. When I'm reading the story, if there's something that seems pretty clear, and something great that I picked up from the writer side and the editorial side in this workshop is, Loren, when you said, when you have that blank space at the end and then you have the little summation, it shows that the author is not trusting either the story to get the point across or the reader to get the point of like, and so therefore this was what happened and how it all ended. And so that's been a really great thing to pick up and to bring and to really think about, like, are you, so now when I see those kinds of things in stories, I'll be like, did you really need that? Or can that just get cut off? Or things like, I think the story starts on page 2, but not deep edits. When people talk about editing stories, we're not like tearing it apart to the guts and doing like huge substantive works. It's little stuff. Like Ron, I've been really fortunate to be on the receiving end of Kristine, Kathryn, Rusch's edits, and they are things of beauty, you guys. It's just this one little thing here, and then we just balance this so, and all of a sudden it's like you've just pulled focus a little bit, and the whole story just.
Sometimes a great story can just be wearing an ugly hat. That was the story that I said, you didn't read this again because you got the ugly hat. And you're like, nope, this doesn't work. I'm like, throw the hat away. Look, and the rest of the story was awesome.
Oh, it's kick butt story.
But the opening, it was wearing an ugly hat. We're just going to fix the hat, and it's going to be, again, strong story.
Yep. Awesome. Opening and title.
And I think a big part of that on the anthology workshop is all of these manuscripts are written in a condensed period of time, so they're all creative voice heavy, right? And so sometimes a writer gets all the creative voice stuff out there and just hasn't quite mushed the story the way that it needs to quite be mushed. So a little touch can help them out quite a bit.
Awesome. So one last really quick line, advice you would want to throw out to aspiring writers out there that you think is really critical for them to hear. It can be like one line, it can be something really concise. What's your favorite bit of advice to give to writers?
Be yourself, write your own story and believe in it.
Trust yourself. Trust that your writing can carry it. Don't pre-edit us.
Enter late, leave early.
Yeah.
I'll say, don't let a prompt that you think sounds, that's not my genre, I just can't do that. Don't let that scare you off. Find a way to make not your genre into your genre.
Be interesting now.
Yeah, don't quit.
Don't give up.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, Mark.
So fun.
And that's it for this episode of the Stark Reflections podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And a huge thank you to my supporters, those who support this podcast over at patreon.com/Stark Reflections, as well as those who are my coffee buddies over at buymeacoffee.com/Mark Leslie. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate all my listeners. Of course, thank you for listening. If you want to support the podcast, you can always leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, or better yet, share this episode or any episode that you found value in with somebody that you think would find value in it as well. That's a great way, because sharing is caring. Thanks again for listening. And so until next week and next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.